Before we continue with the object-oriented programming concepts, we need to fill out our player class a little bit because it doesn't really do very much right now other than allow you to change and return back the value of the data members, also called attributes or properties, or sometimes you'll see the word fields used, like fields in a database. So what I'm going to do is introduce a constructor here. And what I'm going to do is require that when you create a player, you have to pass in a name for that player. And the constructor will set the name, and it will also then randomize values for the other properties, except score will set to 0. Okay, so I've randomized the patients to be somewhere between 50 and 99. I've randomized your patients packs to be somewhere between 1 and 4, and the score is being set to 0 every time. Now I want to point something out. This looks like a pretty straightforward way to do this, but it's important to, right off the bat, be using your getters and setters all the time. So instead of using this technique, I should be using my getter, or in this case, pardon me, I should be using my setter. So I should be doing this. And the reason for that is that remember that the setters are where we put all of the logic around protecting that member variable. So if you suddenly bypass that in your constructor and directly access the method, what you do is you get rid of the protection that the setter provided in the first place. For example, up here, if I said this.name equals quote quote something like this, well, now I've just accidentally set the name to an invalid value, because down here I'm trying to protect my name member from being set to that, and this offers no protection because I'm just going ahead and doing it. So you should always use the setter to prevent yourself from accidentally making a mistake, and you should be containing all of your logic around protecting the variables inside the setter. So make the setter solid, and then always use the setter when you are trying to change values. So if I go back into my main, you can see now I'll get an error because this constructor doesn't really exist. A constructor that takes no parameters doesn't exist anymore. So I'll need to enter in a name to get it to work. That's a good start. I've got a constructor that will give me some random information. It would be nice if I had a way to quickly view the stats on this player. So you remember we have a toString method that we can use to customize how an object should print. And so I should be able to, I'm going to add my override annotation, and in here I'll return back what I'd like this to look like. So first I'll create a string, and then I'll just, in this method, add data to that string and then return it at the end like this. At this point, I am accessing these members directly. Again, you want to get into the habit of using your getters and setters. So in this case, there's generally less of an issue with getting the value directly inside the class. But if your getters, like for example, maybe your getters did something like they dressed up the value. Like maybe your getter not only returned the name, maybe it returned it, with some stuff around it or something like that. And you always wanted the name to be returned with some stars around it or something like that. If you did this, it would just return the name. But if you use the getName method, it will return it with those stars around it. So it's a good idea to use your getters as well, unless there's something specifically you need to do with the exact data. You should always trust your setters and getters. There's a little bit of a performance cost when you call a function, so it's a little slower to do this than it is to just directly access the variable. But unless you're accessing it, thousands and thousands of times, well, more than that, I guess millions and millions of times, you're not going to see any kind of actual performance hit when you're running the code yourself. So you'll see when we get the player name, it'll have these stars next to it, okay? Because I'm using the getter and I've put the stars into the getter. So let's see if I try to print out this player, what it looks like. Okay, so you can see that my name has those asterisks around it, like the getter returns. It formats that name for me. My patience is 72, and the patience packs I started out with 2. Okay, so if I were to run this again, you would see that because I'm randomizing that, oh, that was bad luck. Patience of 50. So because I'm randomizing this, I'm getting a different value every time for my patience and the number of patience packs that I have.